fiat Federal Reserve notes money, they first and foremost think about a medium of exchange. But when I learned about the most important and basic characteristics of money, I think, in my own personal opinion, one of the biggest characteristics is that its value endures beyond your lifetime and into others' lifetimes, generationally. And so, for me, there's only a few monies that have stood the test of time, and I think everybody knows what I'm referring to. It's silver, gold. Those have basically been, historic money for human beings since before Jesus Christ even came around. To use fiat Federal Reserve notes and money in the same phrase, I think it's disparaging of what real money is. It's a currency, sure. Currencies come and go, but money is something that's going to last, and I don't use the term money often for anything other than gold or silver, just because I think it requires that kind of thinking in the terms of this stuff is going to last much longer than I am here, and it's our forefathers used it. They told us to use it, and they warned against not using those as money. And I think we're collectively suffering the consequences of not following that advice.
Couldn't agree with you more. And those are the words of Mr. James Anderson, who is the content manager over at SD Bullion. And you can find his great work at sdbullion.com. And James, thank you so much for that incredible opening to this conversation. And welcome to the Daily Coin.
Thanks for having me, Rory. It's a pleasure being there.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And I did not intend to have that. But when you started speaking, it's like, wait a minute, I need to hit the record button here because
sure.
We don't need these things lost to time. And one of the, when I reached out to you, I'd said I wanted to bring language to the table because it's so important to our everyday lives. And without language, without a common language, we really don't have anything. And without a common understanding and a basic understanding of what money is, what currency is, what the differences between the two are, then we are easily manipulated. And that's where we find ourselves right now today, as you so eloquently just described. And that's a key element to getting back to the foundation of our actual society and a real economy. Because without an actual society that creates a real economy, then we have what we have, which is a technocracy enveloped in communism or socialism, whatever you prefer to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still the same thing. Or am I wrong? I mean, if we look at what's happening today, would you describe it, James, as a technocracy, a communist system, a socialist system, or something completely different?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of a bunch of things. One issue that I have a lot is people try and describe this as a free market or even a capitalist society, and it's not. Once you have a bank oligarchy, then you become something totally different than a free market. Once you don't have free market monies and you just simply use the rule of might makes right, and follow what we say or else, then that means you're not running a true free market economy. And I mean, anybody who knows our financial history knows that when the oligarchy fails, they just get bailed out, and then when average people suffering under the oligarchy fail, they're the ones that get their assets stripped and taken. And it's just been a slow moving process, and I think that's the issue with mankind in general, is that slowly but surely we can be taken advantage of if we're not conscious of what's happening. And I think that's one thing. I mean, in the last 10 years, you can say since the financial crisis that more people have become somewhat conscious, and the internet's helped in that regard. But it feels like we're moving in the wrong direction in general, especially if you look back 1971 or 1913 through today. just in general, the society, it seems like there's separation between those who have real wealth, real power, real insight into the psyche and the thinking and the data that actually drives mankind versus a lot of us out here on the outside who feel somewhat powerless, to be quite honest. I think that's why you see a lot of angst in our society. There's a lot of people who really feel like they don't have much leverage in the situation or much say in their future even. So it's not extremely totally bleak. I'm not a total pessimist when it comes to humanity. I still think that we have a lot to look forward to in the future coming. I just think that we need to get a little bit more responsible in terms of our actions and our decision making.
I agree completely, and I think that I'm actually more optimistic today than I've been in a number of years, and that's because of some of the data that I've been reviewing and taking in from a wide variety of sources, and outside of what you and I would typically follow in the day, looking at gold and silver and the economy and geopolitical concepts or ideas. And I've been and it's really helped to build a better foundation for me to stand on, to look at things more optimistically with a clearer vision of where humanity potentially could be headed. But I agree completely that there is a disconnect, and part of that disconnect is based on language. And if you listen to the young people that are angry, that are, in particular, people that are more radicalized with the Antifa and all of the really the loud voices that are on Twitter and social media and that make it on the news and so forth, they all denounce capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
thinking and referring to this current system as a capitalistic system. It's not, as you pointed out, and
Mm-hmm.
as I've said. I mean, I'm questioning whether it's full blown communist, or I mean, because that's what it looks like. I mean, if you've got, as you said, an oligarchy in place uh, that just strip mines the populace at
Yeah.
will. I mean, come on. I mean, what else? What I'm not sure how else to describe that other than a communistic system, because that's what it looks like. But gold and silver, don't they don't don't those tend to provide a defense? Or
Sure. Yeah. I mean, gold and silver are some of the only things that you can have in terms of assets that are completely outside the financial system. If you so choose, you can have it in your hand or elsewhere in non-banking facilities. And it's like one of the last places you can go where you can actually have almost full 100% privacy. So yeah, of course, the system, the way it operates, I don't necessarily think that there's one or two people in charge, right? I just think it's a collective. The way that things are moving is just a collective of all our wills in general and what we allow and what some people want, and it's just a collection of that and which way it's going. And I think obviously we discussed it, maybe it hasn't been going that great of late for a lot of people, but I do have hope that there'll be some changes and that technology and the internet will be changing too. Hopefully there'll be new types of internet that springs forth from maybe the blockchain technology could help with getting and securing people's privacy in the future and not allowing all this data theft and basically turning us into the product and using us for our data and collecting all this information out of us without us anyone ever reading the terms and agreements of anything and just kind of using these freemium products. And in the end, if it's freemium, that means they're probably using you. So but just in general, like I know if people hear this, they think uh, the United States, it is a great economy. It's incredible, and the fiat Federal Reserve note is incredible in terms of how much purchasing power it yields around the world. It still blows me away every day when I walk around where I'm living currently outside the United States, and it's mainly a place where people are doing agriculture and working all day, and if these people who are working in fields, if they make $20 a day, that's a pretty good living for these people, and they live a comfortable life. And to think that a fiat Fed note $20 bill will cover you for purchasing power in this country is pretty amazing, and how hard people work just to get that bill, and what they have to do to yield some of the things that we eat from a supermarket, et cetera. We just take so much for granted from the soil on up, and we just give so much power over to these Federal Reserve notes, and it's just amazing how far it's gone in 50 years since we kind of separated with Nixon cutting the ties to now in 2020. And I do assume with the coming, there'll probably be some changes in the monetary system in the coming decade or two, that a lot of people won't be happy perhaps with what's offered, and in that time frame they're going to be running a lot to gold and silver, and that should help the value of gold and silver rise in the coming decade or two. And I just think eventually there may become a situation where, gold and silver are outlawed in certain places. China would be one place where you could look to see a repeat of like 1933 in the United States, where the government will say, we're gonna take your gold, or probably gold would be the nationalization that they would use in order to stay in power. But don't assume that won't happen again. It's happened before in history, and it's quite likely, especially with the technology and the ability to track and trace citizens, that could happen again, especially in a place like China, where the property rights are just so pathetic, and people really, they're just they have no leverage at all when it comes to power there. Even billionaires more or less get thrown overboard if they are on the wrong side of the true power there. So in the United States, it's a little bit more elegant, a little bit more widespread. Obviously, we have property rights in general, especially for the elite. They have extreme property rights. And, a lot of the times I do research, Rory, for trying to understand, our system better. And I ran into some pretty interesting stuff Credit Suisse does every year. They do a 300-page PDF roughly on the United States, and where the true wealth is. And there's over 75,000 estates in the United States that have $50 million or more estates. So think about that. You have 75,000, 50 million or more estates. And it's just amazing to think about how many, the power source and truly what really runs the country is that, I would think, right? The 75,000 elite estates, they're going to dictate what the terms are, and it's not going to be these jokers that we see on the screen, who they bring out every 4 years and tell us, these are the power sources. I really think the true power source of the country is those people, those major estates behind it. And it's not to say all those estates are even United States based. I would venture to guess at least a fourth of them are foreign money that's come here, because foreign money, especially oligarchy money that comes from, perhaps not the greatest of all sources, or the most free market of all sources. Once they've gotten a lot of money, they want to go somewhere else where they can protect it. And so when people look around and they say, well, they cite things like the Panama Papers and all these offshore accounts and places like that, where people go to launder their money or park their money outside without paying taxes or paying their fair share in their society. The United States is probably the number one of all places where people send their money. If it's not perhaps even the cleanest money, we probably launder more money than anyone in the world, because people want to come to our country, and Lord knows, if you know anything about AML, it's just the amount of work in order to understand where money's coming out of. It makes me believe that the United States is probably king money launderer of all time, because people they want to be in a society where they know if they send their money there and they have property there, they're going to have rights, and people just can't take it because the politicians changed. Okay. Exactly. And so that's really what the power source in the United States is. It's the financial plumbing. It's the fact that we have all this money coming back at us, and people will use the fiat Fed note because it's still the dominant currency. I don't think that's going to be the same case as we get older in our life. I think as we get toward the end of our lifetimes, it'll be probably multiple different currencies are being used. But right now, the fiat Fed note is still running things. It's still the king on the top of the hill, and really the next competitor is the euro. I don't think the euro is it's going to be something new. Some new technology will probably come around, and there'll be multiple spheres, and we'll be living in kind of a new Cold War with more advanced technology and such.
Well, something that people rarely talk about, and you just threw about 100 logs on the fire right there.
Yeah, James. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Sure.
No, I appreciate it. But I want to get with this last piece that you just said, and then I want to circle back to some of the things that you said. But one of the things that people aren't talking a lot about is the CBDC, which is the uh, China's no, central bank digital currency out of China. And they have been, this has been under development for some time. And there was just another article that came out by way of the South China Morning Post a couple of days ago. And uh, once again, announcing that China is going to be out in front of Facebook's Libra coin. And the Western powers that be sent them a kind little note and said, well, you may want to rethink that. And China said, we're not going to rethink it. We're going to push forward. So that's coming to, that's going to be a challenge to the Federal Reserve note. And the other aspects that I see have been what's going on with Russia and China and their relationship, and the Belt and Road, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, these other Eastern alliances, economic alliances, which I've been following for a number of years now. And on top of that, you have all of these new physical gold markets that are coming online.
Mm-hmm.
All of them potentially will be flowing through the Shanghai Gold Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
If not the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the BRICS gold market that China and Russia have built out, one's in Beijing, one's in Moscow, for the specific purpose of assisting the other BRICS alliance nations, Brazil, India, and South Africa, to be able to more easily acquire physical gold and to have the backing or whatever it is that they need in order to be able to get their hands on physical gold. Because China and Russia, as you are well aware, are number 1 and 2 as far as the production of physical gold coming out of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so that makes it very easy for other nations to be able to get their hands on it. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think in it may not happen tomorrow, like a lot of people were hoping that suddenly China is going to make some gold backed yuan note or this or that, and there'll be a lot of people running toward China. I think it's a slower moving process. It's going to
Yes.
happen, and it's already happening. You have China and Russia engaged in a lot of trading, and I think ultimately gold will be the settlement mechanism that they use, and what you'll end up having are probably multiple blocks of different power centers in the world, and that'll be that'll be like the Asia, Russia, that whole area where essentially they're building the Belt and Road alliance through like Mongolia. That whole area has got a lot of development to come, I think, in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And that'll be one of the major blocks of growth in the world. And gold will probably be the thing that they use to settle national trade and on year like they used to before the Bretton Woods Agreement failed. So it doesn't surprise me. What we're looking at is a little bit of something from the past extended out into the future, and a different type of agreement amongst these countries that don't necessarily want the U.S. in between their trade, and it makes total sense.
Yes.
From their self-interest. So it's complete common sense to me, and it may happen faster than I'm alluding, but it could be a few decades until it really shows itself as being a true power source in the world, and really rivals the U.S. dollar, which will most likely wane a lot in the coming decade or two.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's going to take a few decades. I think that we've got at least one full decade behind us, and that was starting in 2009, because that's when China and Russia both went to the IMF and said, listen, this whole nightmare with the banks blowing up and causing all these problems and affecting us, we don't like it. What are you guys going to do? And they said, that's when China really started pressuring the IMF to be part of the basket of currencies and the SDR and all of that. So it took
Sure.
them 10 years or 7 years, or what was it? It was 2016. It was 2009, 20. So 7 years is how long it took them to get the IMF to move on their request. And
Hmm.
in that time, there was a lot of changes. There were in the bond market that's still out there. They've not gone anywhere. So China can now issue bonds. They haven't. They've only issued one or two, and
Hmm.
both were oversold. But do you think, James, that you said that there was going to be that you see multiple currencies coming to the table as far as global trade settlement? And you also alluded to the possibility of those being gold backed. I mean, that's what I see as well. And I don't think that we're going to have a world reserve currency type of system that we have now. I think that it's going to just be more of a direct currency swap, like the agreements that China set up over the past few years with 30 plus nations around the world. Is that what you're seeing as well, or do you see some other type of global trade settlement mechanism?
So I think like inside of nation states right now, like you see with the BIS, with the CDCC discussions, the central bank digital currency CBDC discussions. So many now they use so many of
Yes.
these an acronym. They're hard to remember.
Alphabet
So
soup.
yeah. So, but they all, I think, inside of their own countries, hundreds of countries that are involved with the BIS are looking at. It would be nice to be able to control our population better with our own, central bank digital currency. And to kind of start to get rid of some of the paper currency and as well as the fractional reserve bank model. They want to have more control centrally, I think, and that's what we'll offer to them if they have this CBDC option. And so I do think that's coming on a state to state level, on a nation to nation level. But on the intra nation level, I think you are going down the right path here, where I think that intra nation countries are still going to want to get value. They're not going to want to just get paper for their assets. I think countries have to learn, emerging markets have to learn a few things. Obviously, they know, I would imagine, that the commodity price discovery mechanism is still happening mainly in the United States. And in order for their real goods and the things that they're shipping out of their country to actually have a fair market price, they're going to have some more dictation as to what the true price and value of those goods are. I think maybe they don't truly understand how artificially suppressed the prices of commodities have been for most of our lifetimes, and most people, even if they're very old, they have no clue of how hard and manipulated the commodity prices generally are. They only spike occasionally, but for the most part, decade on decade, they're suppressed. And so maybe they'll come to some type of understanding of how badly they've been ripped off for the things that really matter in the world. We're talking about oil, things that we eat, just all the things that we use in the physical world that we have to have in order to have a good quality of life. Um, I think a lot of people for decades now have been underpaid for those things, and so, and that makes sense because right now we're at a situation now where it's like 100-year high watermark in terms of. It's been 100 years last time since financial assets like S&P 500, or you add bonds into it versus the general commodity index that Goldman Sachs tracks, and beyond before Goldman Sachs was around here. I mean, we're at a 100-year disparity between the value of paper assets versus true commodities, and that just shows you the extremes that we're at. And so it's not going to, I don't think it'll continue like this forever. I think we're going to revert back toward the mean and probably overshoot in some type of crazy commodity bull market toward later in our lives. But it just shows you, I think, looking around, and just where I live, I look around, I just look at all the work and toil that these people who are raising things that we eat every day to day, that we need to have our good quality of life, to have our nice coffee, etc. And what they get paid for, it boggles the mind. To the fact that they're willing to put up with that. I think in the future that may not be the case.
I think that we are moving in that direction at a very rapid, accelerated pace.
Mhm.
every single day. I think that's what we are seeing around the world. I mean, we
Mhm.
see it in Brazil with the uprisings there. We see it certainly in France. We see it in Italy. We see glimmers of it here and there in the United States. We see it in a multitude of nations where people are like, you know what? This is not working. This
Mhm. Yeah.
system is not working at all for us. And we the people, we're not going to take this anymore, and we're going to start pushing back, and
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing all
Yeah.
around the world. And that's when I alluded to I've been looking at a variety of other situations outside of the norm. These are the types of things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at behind the curtain and what's actually happening, what's really bothering people, what's really, the fact that they are hungry, the fact that they have been ripped off, the fact that they have been abused most, if not all, of their life, and they are beginning to recognize that. Well, what's bringing about that recognition? Why are they seeing that now? I
Mhm.
mean, what's fueling that fire? And
Mhm.
there's a number of reasons for that, which we don't have time to go into. One last question, then I'll let you get back to your day. I mean, the coronavirus has been making a lot of noise the past week, and I think that I have my opinion, which I've been very vocal over at the dailycoin.org about, as far as what I see happening. And I put a lot of, I have a great deal of respect for Chris Martinson over at peakprosperity.com. I have even more respect for him now with this situation going on because of the credentials that he brings to the table and
Mhm.
the impact that it's already having on
Yeah.
markets around the world cannot be denied. If this thing continues to move forward in the way that it looks like, and James, really all we have to, one of the main things that we can look at and go, well, that's not right, is the fact that China has gone from, well, we're gonna fast track a hospital and we're gonna build it in say, I don't know, 6 days, 7 days. Oh,
Mhm.
not one, but two. Oh, not two, but three. And it's like, well, okay,
Mhm.
if it's contained and it's not a problem, why are 56 million people quarantined, and why are you fast tracking? Why? How in the world is it even possible to build a hospital in 6 days?
Right.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, that China's pretty interesting. I mean, I've seen little clips where on the weekend, they'll build a huge overpass bridge that would take us years to do. It's one thing that they're very good at in terms of top-down ability to do things quick and cut the red tape and get things done fast. So I would be surprised if they are able to put up a couple of hospitals in a week or two. But what we're obviously getting and alluding to is that this is a bigger problem than they've obviously led on in the beginning, and we
Yes.
don't know necessarily how big this could get. And it's already made major problems in terms of they've more or less canceled their Chinese New Year. And anybody who knows about Chinese New Year
It's
knows
huge.
that it's the biggest movement of human beings every year. Basically, you have hundreds of millions of Chinese who are flocking from the city back out to their countryside where they're probably their older generation of their family lives, and they sit down for a meal and then they rush back to the shops in the big cities where they have to work again, right? So that's effectively been canceled, but some people probably didn't care and they got away and they ran off, and obviously they went to other countries, and this thing's spreading, and it's scary, and it certainly is concerning. And I think ultimately it's going to hit GDP, like as if GDP is the most important thing in the world. But and financially, I guess it matters so much. But you carve a couple, percentage of GDP off global. It's in terms of like how much economic activity has happened, and it will come back and have adverse repercussions. And we're so extended and so levered right now, especially in the United States stock market, and the bond market, just general in the world. It won't take much bad news to kind of turn this thing around and start getting going in the wrong direction. And ultimately, I think that the financial powers that be in the United States, they're going to do whatever they have to prop up the stock market. So my expectation is we're going to see a next 10 years or so of just, treading sideways or down a little bit maybe for a while, but ultimately it's going to lose in value versus precious metals and other real things that have precious value. I think those in the coming decade will do much better than they have. Stocks will stop, I think, this bubble-licious traction that they're on. I just can't see it going much further, especially with things like this happening.
Yeah, I can't either. And is there any one thing in particular that's on your radar right now outside of what we're talking about right now? I mean, is there something that has your undivided attention for this year? I mean,
Yeah.
what you're kind of looking at?
So I'm looking. I pay a lot of attention to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet and the not QE4 program out of the New York Fed. What's going on, and the fact that J.P. Morgan essentially vanished out of the repo market right as they're getting a few of their precious metal trading heads arrested, essentially for breaking financial laws for roughly 10 years, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. So I'm paying attention to that stuff. I pay attention to what's the Federal Reserve doing with their balance sheet, which of the major banks potentially could go under, and this can happen just over a weekend. So it can happen at any point. If you actually did a true mark-to-market basis on a lot of these commercial banks, many of them would probably be bankrupt if we did true GAAP accounting and actually mark-to-market what they claim of their assets. So it's probably just a matter of time until we pull a plug, and when that happens, we're probably moving into a new system. But there'll be some chaos, and I wouldn't put anything off the table in terms of locking down financial markets. All the laws have kind of been put in place to do that, and I think all your listeners kind of understand that. So I'm waiting to kind of see, well, what's this black swan, or what's the certain events that kind of turn that momentum toward where I think this inevitably goes, which is probably a major bank failure or two, and a few months of craziness that we've never seen before in the financial markets and just in general. I think we're moving toward a new world, and the birthing of that is going to be through some serious traumatic events.
Well, I think that we are definitely headed for some shaky ground. I think we're standing on shaky ground, actually, and the vibrations are only going to intensify from here. And I think that what you have just described with the Federal Reserve's balance sheet is a huge piece of that. I think that what's happening with this, not shakeup, but the situation with this health coronavirus situation and the impact that it's having on markets right now, I think that that's going to intensify. And if it does, in fact, then we're going to have serious problems, not to mention all of the human suffering, not to belittle any of that aspect of it, but the fact that it has the potential to really cause some serious problems.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, bring back into line real value of things. Right now, things are just so far out of whack, and it's going to take some slapping of faces to kind of get things back sober. And I think it's just people need to get back at sober, and it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, actually. So,
yeah, so am I. I am. I'm. This delusion that we've been living through is just. Sometimes it's darkly humorous, but it makes you feel like, how long can this go on?
Exactly. So, well, we've been speaking with James Anderson, and he is the content manager over at sdbullion.com. And James, I really appreciate all your time. I could carry this conversation on for much longer, but I know you got stuff to do, and I do as well. So I certainly appreciate all your time today.
Roy, thanks so much, and to your listeners out there for their interest. Appreciate it.
All right, we will talk with you soon.
Bye.